shouldn't feel this. You're not supposed to be here.
This is an original story written for this channel. The storm hit the mountain at 1:47 in the morning, and Sarah Calloway noticed it the way she noticed most things, quietly and alone. She was standing at the window of the third-floor supply corridor when the first crack of lightning split the sky over the Pine Ridge. The valley below disappeared into white for half a second, then went black again. The hospital hummed around her. Monitors beeped. The heating ducts ticked. Somewhere down on the second floor, old Mr. Harwick was probably awake again, watching the ceiling like it owed him an explanation. Sarah pressed 2 fingers against the cold glass and exhaled slowly. She had been working night shifts at Ravenmore Regional for almost 3 years. 3 years of 12-hour silences broken only by beeping machines and the occasional soft crying coming from behind closed doors. 3 years of being the nurse nobody really noticed, the one who appeared when you needed her and disappeared before you could thank her. She preferred it that way. She had not always been so careful about being invisible. But that was before. She pushed the thought down the way she always did, firmly, deliberately, like pressing a bruise to remind yourself it was there so you wouldn't accidentally lean on it in front of someone. She picked up her clipboard, tucked a loose strand of brown hair behind her ear, and started back toward the nurse's station. She had made it exactly 11 steps when the emergency bay doors burst open 4 floors below. She heard it even from here, the controlled slam of metal, the bark of voices, the particular quality of footsteps that belonged to people who were used to moving through the world like they owned it. Not panic. Not the frantic stumbling of a family carrying someone they loved. This was something else. Coordinated. Deliberate. Like predators pretending to need help. Sarah was already moving toward the stairwell before the intercom crackled. By the time she hit the ground floor, Dr. Marek was already in the bay, looking pale in the fluorescent light. 4 men stood just inside the doors, tall, broad, dressed in dark clothes that were wet from the rain. 3 of them were clustered around a figure laid out on the gurney the paramedic team had scrambled to bring in. The 4th man stood apart from the others near the door. He was watching the room the way a security camera watched a room. He clocked Sarah the moment she entered, and his eyes stayed on her just a half-second too long. What happened? Dr. Marek was already pulling back the emergency blanket. Animal attack, one of the men said. His voice was flat and certain in the way that people spoke when they had decided on a story long before they needed to tell it. Sarah had worked enough trauma nights to know the difference between shock and performance. These men were not shocked. Their heartbeats were steady. Their movements were controlled. They were performing concern the way someone might wear a costume they weren't entirely comfortable in. She stepped closer to the gurney and stopped breathing for a moment. The man on it was enormous. Not in an ordinary athletic way, but in a way that seemed to belong to a different order of things. Wide shoulders strained the table's width. His jaw was a hard line beneath a layer of dark stubble. His skin, wherever it wasn't covered in blood, was pale in a way that wasn't illness. It was more like marble, like something that had never quite been soft. His shirt had been cut open. Sarah's clinical mind registered the wounds before anything else registered. 5 lacerations across the left side of his torso. Deep. Too deep. The kind of tearing that should have come with arterial damage and a blood pressure reading in the basement. And yet, she reached for his wrist before she realized she was doing it. His pulse was strong. Alarmingly strong. Like something inside him was refusing, with great stubbornness, to yield. He shouldn't still be stable, she said quietly, more to herself than anyone. He needs to be, one of the standing men replied. She looked up. The one who had spoken was lean and dark-eyed, with a scar that cut through the left side of his lower lip. He was looking at her the way people looked at someone they were deciding whether to trust, or eliminate from consideration entirely. Sarah held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then looked back at her patient. Then stepped back and let me work. She heard something shift in the room, a slight recalibration, like the air pressure had changed. The scarred man moved back half a step. She didn't let herself think about what that meant. For the next 4 hours, Sarah existed in the narrow corridor between training and instinct. She stitched tissue that seemed to be knitting itself together faster than it should have. She stabilized vitals that swung through ranges her monitors weren't quite designed to handle. She asked no questions because she had learned, years ago, that some answers came with consequences you weren't ready for. She simply worked, and the deep competence in her hands carried her through. At some point around 4 a.m., Dr. Marek disappeared to handle a second admission, a logging accident up on Route 9. Sarah found herself alone in the room with her patient and the quiet mechanical breathing of the equipment around him. The storm outside had softened to a steady rain. She was checking the wound dressing on his left side when she felt it, a change in the room's energy that raised the fine hairs on the back of her neck. Not danger, exactly. More like gravity. Like something massive had shifted its attention. She looked up. His eyes were open. They were dark, deep brown at first, and then, as she watched, something moved through them. A current. A glow, amber and brief, like a coal catching a breath of air in the dark. There and gone in an instant. But she had seen it. She did not step back. She couldn't have explained why. Every sensible instinct she owned was telling her that whatever this man was, it was not something she was equipped for, and yet her feet stayed flat on the floor and her hands stayed steady, and she thought, I have been afraid before. This doesn't feel like that. He said nothing. Just watched her with that deep, still attention that felt less like being observed and more like being remembered. You're at Ravenmore Regional, she said, keeping her voice at the same low, measured tone she used for every patient coming out of sedation. You're stable. You lost a significant amount of blood, but you're not afraid. His voice came out rough and low, like something unused for a long time. It moved through the room the way resonance moved through deep water. It wasn't a question. It was a notation. Like he was recording something. Should I be? Sarah asked. He studied her. The amber current moved through his eyes again, slowly this time, and she felt something respond to it, deep in her chest, like a tuning fork pressed against a vibrating surface. An answering hum. Involuntary. Strange. Yes, he said simply. The door opened a moment later. The scarred man stepped in, followed by 2 of the others. The shift in their bodies when they saw those open eyes was immediate and total. They straightened, pulled in, reorganized around him like planets correcting their orbits. Alpha. Out. One word. Barely above a murmur. The 3 men left. Sarah looked at the door, then back at him. Alpha. She set her clipboard down on the metal tray table beside his bed, very carefully, and thought about all the ways she had been told, throughout her life, to mind the boundaries of things. To stay in her lane. To not ask questions about the patients who arrived at odd hours with men who stood like weapons arranged in human shapes. What's your name? She asked instead. Something shifted in his expression, the faintest loosening of the hard line of his jaw. As if the question surprised him. As if no one had asked him something so simple in a very long time. Kale, he said. Sarah, she replied. The word moved across the room and landed, and the air between them seemed to do something she had no clinical vocabulary for. It wasn't quite recognition. It wasn't attraction, though that would come later, dressed in complications she couldn't yet imagine. It was simpler than both. It was the feeling of something that had been locked for a long time opening by 1/4 of an inch. She turned back to his chart because she needed to look somewhere that wasn't his face, and said professionally, "You need rest. Whatever you are, you took significant damage and your body needs time." "Whatever I am," he repeated. Not offended. Almost amused. "I've been a nurse for 8 years. I've seen animal attacks." She kept her voice even. That wasn't one. A long pause. Outside, the rain moved across the window in slow grey sheets. "No," Kale said. "It wasn't." She nodded, made a note on the chart, and moved toward the door. "Sarah." She stopped. You stayed. He wasn't looking at her, he was staring at the ceiling, and there was something in his face she recognized from patients who didn't expect to survive things. Something like wonder, worn down to its raw edges. When they told you not to. You stayed and you worked. It's my job. That's not why. She didn't answer, because he was right, and she didn't know yet what the real answer was. She stepped out into the hallway and stood for a moment with her back against the wall, listening to her own heartbeat, which was doing something irregular and unfamiliar in her chest. Down the corridor, near the stairwell, the scarred man was watching her. She straightened up, tucked her clipboard under her arm, and walked in the other direction. By the time the morning shift arrived at 6 a.m., 3 more men had appeared in the waiting area. All large. All still. All oriented, with that subtle, compass needle accuracy, toward room 114. The charge nurse, Delphine, pulled Sarah aside near the locker room. "Those men asked about you specifically," she said, voice low and tight. By name. They asked who Sarah Calloway was. Sarah felt the information land somewhere cold in her sternum. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing." "But Sarah," Delphine's hand tightened briefly on her arm. "I don't know what you got yourself into last night, but these are not regular people." "I know," Sarah said. She did know. She had known since the moment she walked into that bay and felt the weight of something ancient and enormous shift its attention toward her like a tide turning. She just didn't know yet that by the time the sun set again, she would understand exactly what it meant. Or that the quiet, careful, invisible life she had built herself, brick by patient brick, was already over. It had ended the moment she looked into amber-glowing eyes and did not run. 3 days. Cale Draven had not left room 114 in 3 days, not because he couldn't. By the end of the first night, Sarah had watched the deepest of his wounds reduce themselves to pink scarring that should have taken 6 weeks to form. By the second morning, the lacerations were nearly gone, smooth skin replacing torn tissue with a quiet efficiency that made her thermometer readings feel almost insulting in their normalcy. He stayed because he chose to. And that distinction, she was beginning to understand, meant everything with a man like him. The hospital had changed around his presence the way a river changes when a boulder drops into it. Everything rerouted. The other staff moved differently on the ground floor now, quicker, more careful, pretending not to notice the 7 men who had taken up residence in the waiting area. The men who never Saturday, never looked at their phones. Just stood at angles that covered every entrance and exit, still as furniture and twice as immovable. Delphine had stopped asking questions after the second day. The hospital administrator had made one phone call to whoever had authorized the private room arrangement and had not spoken about it since. Only Sarah went in. She told herself it was clinical obligation. She wrote it that way in the chart: patient monitoring, wound assessment, vitals check, and her handwriting was steady and professional and gave nothing away. But she knew, in the honest part of herself she rarely consulted, that she went in because the hour she spent in that room was the only hour of her day that felt fully real. Everything outside room 114 had the muffled quality of a dream. Everything inside it was sharp-edged and immediate and alive in a way that made her own pulse feel like it was finally beating at the right tempo. She did not examine that too closely. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, she brought him water and found him sitting up, elbows on his knees, staring at the middle distance with the expression of a man resolving something enormous in a very small internal space. He looked up when she entered, and the amber moved through his eyes, slower now, like something that had stopped trying to be subtle. "Your people are making my charge nurse nervous," Sarah said, setting the water down. "My people make everyone nervous. Do you want me to be nervous?" He considered her. "No." "Then tell them to sit down occasionally. Standing in a row like that is intimidating." "I was going to say strange looking." She checked the last remaining faint marks on his side, professional hands doing professional work, ignoring the warmth of his skin and the way his breathing shifted when she was close. "But yes, intimidating." A sound came out of him, low and brief, almost surprised. It took her a moment to identify it. He had laughed. She looked up, and his eyes were on her face with that full, unguarded attention he didn't seem to know how to turn off, and she thought, there it is. Under all the rock and iron. Something tender and slightly bewildered, like a man who had forgotten that small things could exist in the same world as him. You do that, he said. Do what? Make it smaller. He was quiet for a moment. Everything I carry. When you're here, he stopped. Started again. There is something inside me that has been loud my entire life. Since I took my first breath. A constant pressure. Like holding a storm still with bare hands. His jaw worked. It stops when you're near. Sarah set the clipboard down. She had been waiting for this conversation the way you wait for a diagnosis you already suspect. How long? She asked carefully. Since the moment you walked into that bay. She exhaled. That shouldn't be possible. And yet. I'm a nurse, Cale. I'm not. I don't have any ability that would. You do. He said it with the calm certainty of someone who had been tracking evidence for days. You always have. You've just been careful about who sees it. The truth of that landed like a stone dropped in still water, and the ripples went outward through her in all directions. Because he was right. She had always been careful. Careful to stand at the edge of a grieving family's circle without stepping in, so they would feel the comfort without locating its source. Careful to be quietly present in the room of an agitated patient without touching them, until the agitation softened. Careful to never let it be obvious, because the one time she had let it be obvious, the one time someone had seen, it had cost her everything she'd had. You shouldn't know that, she said softly. Maybe not. His voice had dropped. But I do. The room held them both in a long, careful silence. Then the door opened without a knock. The woman who walked in was tall and stunning in the specific way of something designed to cause damage, sharp cheekbones, dark hair pulled back severely, eyes that moved over Sarah with the flat professional assessment of someone pricing livestock. She was wearing clothes that were too good for a hospital waiting room and carrying the kind of posture that treated every room it entered as a territory to be assessed and, if necessary, taken. She stopped a few feet inside the door and looked at Sarah the way she might look at a piece of furniture that had appeared in the wrong room. You're the nurse, she said. It wasn't a greeting. It was a categorization. Drina. Cale's voice had changed. Not softer, harder. Like something being deliberately suppressed. The pack is waiting, Cale. 3 days is. I'm aware of how many days it's been. Drina's gaze moved back to Sarah, slow and surgical. Is she the reason you're still in this room? Drina. The others are asking questions. She took a small step toward Sarah, not aggressive, technically. Just a recalibration of space. They want to understand why their Grand Alpha King is sitting in a human hospital being tended by a... She paused, and the pause was the cruelest part. A woman no one has ever heard of. From nowhere. With nothing. Sarah felt the words go in. She kept her face even. She had learned, in a lifetime of being the quietest person in the room, how to absorb without reacting. How to make herself so still that contempt passed over her like weather. She picked up her clipboard. I'll come back for the evening check, she said to Cale, already moving toward the door. Stay. His voice was quiet, but it had weight. She stopped. Drina. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. She was learning. The authority was built into the register, not the volume. You have said what you came to say. Now leave. Something moved across Drina's face, so fast it was almost invisible. Fury. And beneath the fury, something older and more complicated. Something that looked, in the half-second before she sealed it away, almost like grief. She left without another word. The door clicked shut. Cale's eyes were on Sarah's face. I'm sorry. You don't have to. I am apologizing, he said carefully, like a man who didn't do it often and wanted to make sure it counted, because you did not deserve that. Not for helping me. Not for any reason. Sarah looked at the door. Then at him. She's not wrong, though. About what? That I'm from nowhere. With nothing. She said it plainly, without self-pity, the way you state facts about weather. I'm a night shift nurse in a mountain hospital that most people have never heard of. I have 6 houseplants and a library card and a 3-year gap in my life I don't talk about. She met his eyes. I don't belong in whatever your world is, Cale. He was quiet for a long moment. My world, he said finally, is full of people who belong to it and would burn it down for an extra inch of power. He looked at his hands. You are the first person in 4 years who has been in a room with me without wanting something. I wanted you not to die on my table. Yes. And something in the way he said it, quiet, weighted, made her understand that to him, that particular want was more extraordinary than she could calculate. That being wanted to live, with no secondary agenda attached, was not something he was accustomed to. She sat down in the chair beside his bed. She didn't plan to. Her legs simply made the decision and the rest of her followed, setting the clipboard aside, and they sat together in the afternoon light coming grey and soft through the rain-streaked window, and she told him, because he had told her something real, and it seemed only fair, about the 3-year gap. About the teaching hospital in the city. About the patient she'd tried to save from himself, on a night shift that felt like this one, and the way she had let herself be fully seen for the first time, allowed her calming ability to move without concealment, pushed everything she had into that room, and how it had led not to gratitude but to clinical review, professional suspension, quiet institutional burial of something they could not explain and therefore could not permit. She had come to Raven Moor to disappear. She said all of this to the window, not to him, but she felt him listening with the whole of his attention, which was a substantial thing to be listened to with. When she finished, he said, "They were afraid of you. They didn't understand me." "Same thing," Cale said, and she couldn't argue with that. It was Ocean who found her in the corridor that evening. She had placed him as second in command from the way the other men oriented toward him, not with the absolute gravity they directed at Cale, but with the careful deference of people who knew they were being watched and evaluated. He was handsome in a controlled way, with careful eyes that never quite stopped moving, and he smiled with his mouth only. "Miss Calloway." He fell into step beside her with the ease of someone who had practiced making his company feel like your idea. "I hope you understand that some of us are grateful for your care of the Alpha." "Of course," Sarah said. "He speaks of you." A brief pause, testing. "More than is perhaps wise." Sarah kept walking. "I'm his nurse. For now." Another pause. "You seem like an intelligent woman. Practical." His voice was warm and reasonable, the kind of voice that made unreasonable things sound like common sense. A man in Cale's position carries obligations that don't make room for personal complications. "You understand that. Surely." He looked at her sidelong. It would be unfortunate if someone who helped him were later seen as the reason things went wrong. Within the pack. Within the territories. These things have a way of what? Sarah asked. He smiled again. Resolving themselves. She stopped walking and looked at him directly for the first time. He was still smiling. His eyes were still moving. "Are you warning me or threatening me?" she asked. "Neither." He spread his hands. "Advising. Out of respect." She looked at him for a moment longer, at the careful construction of him, the performance of reasonableness over something dense and opportunistic underneath, and then she nodded once and continued down the corridor. She didn't tell Cale that evening. She should have. Later, she would understand that clearly. But at the time, Ocean's words had landed too close to the doubt she already carried. "You don't belong, you're from nowhere, you're a complication," and she didn't want to bring that darkness into the 1 hour of her day that still felt like oxygen. Instead she sat beside him in the fading evening light, and they talked about things that had nothing to do with packs or power or the machinery of a world she was only beginning to glimpse. He asked about her houseplants with complete seriousness, and she told him about the one succulent she had killed 3 times through excessive care, and he looked at her like that was the most interesting thing anyone had told him in years. She went home at midnight feeling something she did not have a safe word for. She watered her surviving plants and stood at her kitchen window and told herself, very firmly, that she was a practical woman who had already lost 1 life to being seen. That she had rebuilt this quiet small life with deliberate hands, and she was not going to let amberlit eyes and 1 genuine laugh undo the architecture of 3 careful years. She believed herself completely. Right up until the moment, at 3 a.m., when her phone rang with the hospital's number and Delphine's voice came through tight and strange. "Sarah, you need to come. Something is wrong. He's been asking for you and no one else will go in." She was already reaching for her keys. Room 114 was a different room when she pushed the door open. The monitoring equipment had been pushed against the far wall, not knocked over, moved, Precisely, the way you move things when you need space and have enough control to do it carefully. The four-stand was tipped at an angle that suggested it had been relocated by someone who no longer found its presence tolerable. Cale was standing at the window. His back was to her. His hands were at his sides, open, and she could see from the doorway that every line of him was pulled tight, like a bridge cable near its load limit. The amber light was coming off him in something that was no longer subtle, casting a faint warm glow on the rain-dark glass. She heard the low sound he was making, something below speech, below language, a frequency that she felt more in her sternum than her ears. The monitoring equipment beeped unevenly, and she understood without being told that it had been reading something no clinical vocabulary had categories for. "Cale," she said quietly. His hands closed. Something happened. His voice was controlled with visible effort, like a man holding a river back with his forearms. "Within the pack. I received word an hour ago." A pause. A betrayal. "From within my own ranks." She crossed the room and stood beside him at the window. Not touching. Just beside him. "I cannot," he stopped. Started again. "I have held this position for 11 years. I have made decisions that cost people things they can't recover. I have been the authority that does not bend, because if it bends even once, everything built on it fractures." His jaw was tight. "But there are moments when the weight of it becomes too loud," Sarah said softly. He turned to look at her. She met his eyes, the amber full and steady now, not pulsing, just present, and she let the thing she usually kept so carefully contained move outward without walls. The calm she carried everywhere, the gift she had been punished once for using, she let it fill the space between them like warmth filling a cold room. She watched it reach him. Watched the cable-tight tension in his shoulders release by a fraction. Watched his breathing deepen. He said her name. Just her name, quietly, the way you'd say the name of the only solid thing in a tilting room. And she understood then, with the certainty of something that had been true for longer than she'd admitted, that she was in extraordinary trouble. Not because he was dangerous. Because he wasn't. Not to her. He had never been, for a single moment, anything other than exactly and completely himself with her, and she had no defense prepared for that. None at all. She was still standing at that window, shoulder almost touching his, when the door opened behind them both. Ocean stood in the doorway. Two of the men from the corridor were visible behind him. And the expression on Ocean's face, the smile entirely gone now, replaced by something cold and decided, told Sarah that the advising was over. That the resolving had begun. They took her at dawn. Not Ocean himself, he was too careful for that. He sent 3 of the younger pack soldiers, the ones new enough to their rank to still confuse loyalty with obedience. They came to her apartment building at 5:40 in the morning, when the mountain light was the color of a bruise and the birds hadn't started yet and the world had not quite assembled itself back into the shape of ordinary things. She opened the door because the knock was steady and unhurried, and in her experience, danger rarely knocked. She was wrong about that. They didn't hurt her. She registered that later as significant. Ocean had been specific about it, she suspected, because damaged leverage was reduced leverage. They drove her up a forest road she had never been on, past the tree line, to a cluster of buildings set into the mountainside that she would not have been able to find on any map. The architecture was stone and timber, old and enormous, and it sat in the pre-dawn darkness like something that had grown there rather than been built. She was put in a room, not a cell, but a room with a closed door and 2 men outside it, and she sat on the edge of a wooden chair and breathed through the cold fear moving through her in slow waves. She thought about running. She was a practical woman. She had grown up in a practical house with a practical mother who had taught her that feelings were for evenings and crises were for problem-solving. So she sat with the fear until it finished its initial volume, and then she began to look at the room. One window. Pine forest on the other side of it. The door, solid, opened inward, which meant the hinges were on her side. 2 voices outside, speaking quietly in a language she didn't know but could parse by rhythm. Bored. Stationed. Not alert. She was cataloguing the second window latch when she heard it, a sound from somewhere deeper in the building, low and structural, like a subsonic note pressed into the walls. She had heard that sound once before. In room 114, 3 days ago, standing at a rain-dark window. Cale had felt it the moment she was taken. He could not have explained the mechanism of it to anyone who asked. It was not a thought, not a sound, not anything with sensory form. It was an absence. As sudden and unmistakable as a light going out in a room you'd forgotten was lit. He was in the middle of a territorial council when it happened, seated at the head of a long stone table with 7 pack lieutenants and Elder Voss, who was 140 years old and had the eyes of something that had seen the full arc of every possible human and inhuman mistake and had stopped being surprised by any of them. Cale was speaking, mid-sentence, about the boundary dispute in the Eastern Territory, and then he stopped. The room went very still. He stood up slowly. "Alpha," one of the lieutenants started. "Where is Ocean?" His voice was quiet. It was always quiet. The quiet was the part that had been making people step backward for 11 years. Silence from the table. He looked at the faces. He had been reading rooms since he was 17 years old, since the night he took this position from a predecessor who had not given it willingly and had not survived the attempt to keep it. He knew the texture of loyalty and the texture of its absence, and what he was reading in 2 of the faces at this table was the specific blankness of people who knew something they had decided not to say. "Where," he said again, still quiet, "is she?" Elder Voss, who had not moved, who had been watching Cale since he entered the room with the patient assessment of someone who had been waiting for a particular thing to happen, said, "The Northwestern Holding. Ocean moved her this morning." The temperature in the room dropped in a way that had nothing to do with the heating. Cale turned toward the door. "Cale." Elder Voss's voice carried the specific authority of extreme age and survived history. It stopped Cale's feet for exactly 3 seconds. "Before you go, you should know what she is." "I know what she is." "You know what she does." "That is different." The elder's hands folded on the table, unhurried, deliberate. "She is a quieting. The second one born in 400 years. A soul woven from the frequency that predates the shift, predates the pack structure, predates everything your world was built on." He paused. "She does not calm the storm in you because of proximity or accident. She calms it because she is, constitutionally, the only thing your particular nature was designed to rest against." He let that land. "You felt her absence like a wound because it is one. This is not sentiment, Alpha. It is architecture." The room was completely silent. Cale stood at the door with his back to all of them. "That changes nothing," he said. "I know," Elder Voss said. "That's why I told you." She had been in the room for 2 hours and 40 minutes when she heard the sound change. The low structural frequency she had felt through the walls shifted, still the same source, the same register, but the quality of it altered. It had been controlled before, a thing held tightly inside its own limits. Now it was becoming something else. Expanding. The way a river expands when the banks are no longer adequate to contain it. One of the voices outside her door stopped mid-sentence. The other said something sharp and then went quiet. Then she heard footsteps, not from the corridor, but from somewhere above and outside, coming through the stone of the building itself, each one resonating in the floor beneath her feet. The door opened. Not the 2 guards. They were backing away from it, she saw as the door swung inward, backing with the careful, involuntary movement of animals creating distance from something that outranks them in every biological category. Cale walked through the door.